Welcome to Romera Records virtual cast. Today we have on Kelsey Harris. How's it going, Kelsey?
It's going pretty well. How are you doing?
Great. We found each other on Pod Match, and I figured I'd do a podcast with you. You know a lot about chronic illness. I will say you're probably the first person I know that knows a lot about chronic illness, but feel free to explain, I guess, really how you got into that and why that's such a passionate topic for you.
Yeah, for sure. I am by profession a registered clinical counselor, so sometimes called a psychotherapist. And I actually went into this field because I myself had a chronic illness. And it started back in 2015, 2016. And part of my care, I decided I would see a therapist, as well as, go to physical therapy and chiropractor, and of course, my regular rheumatologist specialist, to get my condition under control. And one thing that I really took away from it was that therapy was very helpful for me in dealing with the emotional impacts. And when you have a chronic illness that has a chronic pain component to it, there's this emotional almost attachment you get to the pain. It's very, very common in people with chronic illnesses and chronic pain conditions. So as I started to, learn different ways to kind of deal with my emotional components of pain, my thoughts about pain, I actually noticed that my pain went down as well. So I mean, definitely a combination. It's not just the therapy portion that helped with that. It's a combination of everything. But I definitely saw where therapy was really important. And so I decided to go back to school and get my master's degree and help other people who were going through the same thing.
Wow. So when you say therapy, are we just talking like, you sit down, you speak with somebody therapy, or is this physical therapy, or is it both? Like, what'd you do?
Yeah, so it's sit down and talk to somebody therapy. So talk therapy is what it's often called. But the way I practice, I use acceptance and commitment therapy primarily with people with chronic pain and chronic illness, because there's a huge evidence base of it working with these conditions. And this type of therapy, yeah, there's a talking component to it, of course, but it's also very experiential. So we tend to do more things together in therapy, which could be, mindfulness activities. It could be writing out a life map for somebody, but it's more like we're doing stuff together.
I definitely think that there is a connection with this, mind and body. A lot of people, they have this, the thought of, we're all just a brain that's inside of this vehicle, and the vehicle is the body, and that's what life is. But if you are able to really tap into who you are and why do you do things, if you're a type of person who you wake up in the morning and you feel like crap, every morning you just feel like crap, and if you just tell yourself, well, that's just who I am, it's like, well, no, why are you like that? You should figure those things out. So I definitely think that there is some sort of, as you said, you went back and got your master's in this type of field, because it's something that should be studied, and it's something that people should be more aware of.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you nailed it with the mind body connection. There's so much research supporting that, and it's true. How we think about our body can change how we feel about our body, and in the same way, what happens in our body can totally change what we're thinking and feeling. And it makes sense because everything that's happening in your body is sending signals to your brain. So of course, your mind has to be involved at some level, right?
Absolutely. So when you're going to school, is everything seem new to you, or is it a bunch of stuff where you nod your head and say, yeah, that makes sense, or how was it?
Yeah, so school was fantastic. I went to a fantastic university, so Yorkville University, which is actually an online program. So it's based out of Canada, but a lot of my professors were American. And it was, combination. Like there was definitely some stuff that I knew, and a lot of stuff that was brand new to me. And it was really, really interesting because I don't have a psychology background. I actually have a background in film. Film studies was my bachelor's degree, and then I worked in film for a bit as well. So this was like a totally different field. So I definitely learned a lot. But some of it made sense, like the mind body stuff I already got from when I went to therapy. Like I understood some of those connections already. So it was just giving myself more like of the evidence that supports all of this and how it works and the different brain mechanisms and all of that that works too.
Are you a research kind of person whenever you get involved in something? I know like so whenever I messed up my back, I was in the military and I messed up my back, and I felt like I got my PhD in being a back doctor. I was, researching everything. Did you feel like that when you were diagnosed with your illness? Like, did you like, oh, I need to research everything, or did you just, I'll let the doctors handle it, and I'll let them tell me, what's going on?
I definitely research. I think most people, it seems that most people with chronic pain, chronic illness, they do their own research. And I think there's, you have to a certain degree, because you're not necessarily going to get all the information from the doctor. In fact, my doctor said, you can, here's a good website to look up online if you want a few more details as well. So, they have limited appointment times, whatever. They can only do what they can do. So I definitely spent a lot of time researching my condition, and then other related conditions too, just out of curiosity, especially because my condition, which is undifferentiated connective tissue disease, is a diagnosis where you don't really have enough symptoms to have a more concrete diagnosis. So you don't really have lupus, you don't have rheumatoid arthritis, but you might have features of those different types of illnesses. So for me, like, researching all those different illnesses was really helpful. The only thing I would caution for people doing their own research is sometimes it can actually give you health anxiety about, what it could be or how bad it could get, as opposed to just listening to your body and going with what you are actually just feeling inside.
So when you're finding this information out, is there something in particular that it seemed like it just oh wow, it just like a light bulb popped off. You're like, that's why this has been happening, or that's why that's been happening.
Not really a light bulb moment, at least not at first. I think that I was just like, okay, yeah, this kind of makes sense now. Like, oh, I understand why I'm having pain, in certain areas, or um, so why I'm tired all the time. So definitely it was like, oh yeah, this is kind of makes sense. As I've done more research about chronic conditions in general, a lot of stuff has been like, wow, okay, now this really makes sense. For example, how the relationship between trauma, especially early childhood experiences, and chronic pain and chronic illness. Huge correlation between those. The relationship between repression of emotions and chronic illness. Again, huge relationship. Doesn't mean everybody has these things, but certainly a large degree of people do. And depending on how you define these things as well, a lot more people than you would probably realize have them.
I am convinced my wife has something like this because she is tired all the time. And we joke about it all the time because she'll talk about getting some coffee. Like, she loves coffee. So she'll drink some coffee and she thinks, that's the cure. And then boom, she's still tired. I hate to leave her alone for 5 minutes in a cozy couch because, yeah, it's game over after that. But yeah, I mean, there's probably plenty of people out there who, are just going throughout their normal day and having these issues, and, they have no idea. They just think it's normal. And, but I think that's the disconnect between people in general, because like us as humans, number one, we hate to ask for help. And then
Yes.
number two, we assume everybody's living the same life that we're living, or everybody's not living the same life we're living, but like um, everybody's got like the same viewpoint, and so we hardly ask the question like. So I was watching this TV show. God, I can't remember the name of it, but I think it's like We Are Humans, or I think it was 100 Humans. And so everybody's playing games and stuff like that. And what they're trying to do is just see like how people do certain things. And one of the things was they got people to tell them how they wipe when they poop. And it was such a simple thing. Just tell people how you wipe when you poop. But it was the fact that they had to share information that you don't normally share with people. And it kind of threw people off guard. You know, some people, you know, they're kind of timid to answer, and then other people, you know, if they're a very open type of person, then they just start blabbing exactly how to do it. But that's a fallacy of people, right? Like we tend to not, we think about the things that we're bad at or the things that we have issues with, and we're just like, oh, I don't want to, you know, tell other people because I might be embarrassed or something like that. But we're all human, and that's something that we just kind of have to suck it up and realize, like, hey, everybody's got issues, but what are your particular issues? And they might help somebody else if you help share them.
Yeah, totally. And I think that's where, you know, and not everybody has great family support. So, and it's important to recognize that because there's going to be a huge range as well. So absolutely. I mean, if you can definitely share with people in your life, I think that's really important. If you can't, for whatever reason, there's fantastic online support groups. Maybe you do need to go see a therapist, you know, like there's lots of options out there for people to talk about like the things that are going on in their lives, whether it's, you know, physical health related or mental health related. There's always somebody out there who is going to be able to empathize with you, maybe has gone through something similar. And that sharing is so important because you're right, we do all come from a different worldview, and you know, there may be similarities in some of our experiences, but it's always going to be a bit unique to us. So it's really important just to recognize that, and that sharing and finding other people to talk to about that is really important.
When you're talking with your therapist, like what were some questions that were, I guess, difficult for you to maybe answer, and then also, I guess, realizations that you had about yourself?
That's a really good question. You know, there were some topics around some childhood, like bullying incidents that were really difficult for me to go into. And, you know, a lot with therapy is when we talk about the past, in most types of therapy, you're also going to talk about how it's affecting you in the present moment. And so that kind of realization and correlation and those kind of topics were a bit more difficult for me. But what I realized, again, kind of through therapy and then more research was, oh yeah, like that kind of makes sense that those incidents maybe affected my physiology as well as you know, some mental health. So I think that was a really important moment for me. And the one thing that my therapist did with me and my naturopath did that I absolutely loved was just mindfulness. You know, doing some meditation, some grounding techniques. I found it so helpful for me to learn to experience my body in a different way, where it wasn't just about the pain. Yeah, sure, there's pain, but like, what can you do with the pain? You know, what can you do aside from the pain? And if I hadn't learned those techniques, I don't think I would have like gone back to school because I wouldn't have been able to. And I often see this in like online support groups and stuff. People are saying like they can't do anything, and absolutely 100% believe them. They can't because that's where they're at currently. But it doesn't have to be like that. Like there can be you know, I can do some things, but you have to learn how to get there. So, and that's really what I learned in therapy.
How did you meditate?
Yeah, so meditation's interesting. Um, I usually use guided meditations even now. I now try to meditate like 20 minutes a day. Back then, if I could do 5 minutes like every other day, that was fantastic. Like it's like really hard to learn to meditate and get into the habit of it.
Yeah,
And
just sitting still, like, you know, the human body, some people say we're just meant to move, you know, we're meant to go places, be nomads, but the ability to just sit still and don't think and just focus, it's difficult.
yeah, and I actually like that you just brought up don't think, because that is a real common misconception with mindfulness and meditation is that we're not supposed to think. But the truth is our minds are designed to constantly think. Our brains are gonna constantly generate thoughts. Even people who are like, you know, monks, they've been doing this for their entire lives, they still have thoughts going through their brains. The whole key with mindfulness is to just notice when it happens. So if you're sitting there meditating, I notice a thought comes, okay, and then I just go back to my anchor, which is for me usually my breath. Um, you know, and then I kind of watch that for a while, and then another thought comes, and maybe that one took me a little further away, and then I notice eventually, and then I go back. And that's really all meditation is. It's just noticing, coming back, noticing, coming back.
So it's not really the elimination of thoughts as it is the control of your thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, control is an interesting word. I never thought of that way, but it's just being present to like everything that's there, I think is really the key. It's like it's not even that you're trying to control your thoughts, you're just trying to notice what happens in your whole experiencing. So even if you just notice, oh, like my legs are uncomfortable from sitting like this, that's a thought that goes through, but it's also sensation. So you're just noticing that and you're like, oh, okay. And then just go back to, again, whatever your anchor is.
Yeah, just having that kind of like awareness. That's another word instead of control. You're not trying to be like push this thought somewhere.
Exactly.
Yeah, you just kind of just want to be aware of listening to your body and seeing what your body is really telling you. I think that's something that everybody should do. I've heard in cultures of like Japan, they'll go to work and before they start work they have to like stretch or do breathing exercises or something like that. If we did that in America, that would be phenomenal. I think stock prices would go out the roof. Everybody would just be swimming in money, and everybody's families, marriages would be going up like crazy. No divorce, like things would just be amazing because people just don't take the time to do a self test, a self awareness test of, hey, how did I sleep last night? What did my dreams tell me? And then all the way to how did my breakfast make me feel? Just being mindfully aware of as I was talking about earlier, like what your body is telling you and what is going on in your day to day life and how you can take that harness that energy, that mood, and then carry it out through your performance of the day.
Yeah, totally. If you learn to meditate, meditation is like it's like exercise. So it's like if you're gonna, run, if you want to run a marathon, what are you gonna do? You're gonna start by running small distances and work your way up. And then eventually you can run kind of no problem, right? You can run whenever you need to. And so meditation works the same way for mindfulness. It's just an exercise to get your brain to learn to do this very present moment awareness. And then when you're doing things through your day, yeah, then you are more not mindfully present. You're more aware of everything that's happening, and it does just it can make your life a lot better. And you're right. If we did this in North America, it would be like a totally different society. But you would see things like people being less stressed at work. Right. People probably would have better marriages because you would be more mindfully communicating. Right. So it would be great to see. And I think there is a bit more of this coming in, like you're hearing it a bit more, which is fantastic. And there's also great programs like mindfulness-based stress reduction, right? Like I don't know if you've heard of that, but been around since the late 70s, early 80s. It's program that's run all around the world, is started by an American doctor named John Kabat-Zinn. And he basically brought kind of mindfulness to the forefront in North America because it was mostly an Eastern tradition before that. And yeah, like that kind of program is meant for people who just want to reduce some stress in their lives by practicing meditating essentially every day.
How do you think that stuff like this affects your ability to like have a good memory or recall things? If like you go to a party, and I am the worst at this. I literally introduce myself to people, and when they tell me their name, I'm like, by the way, I'm not going to remember your name. Like I tell people that to let them know ahead of time. I'm not going to remember their name because I'm awful with names. Now, I'm really good at remembering a name and remembering a face. But if you're like, somebody, if like in jail, they show me a picture. I'm like, who is this person? I'm like, I know that face, but I have no idea what that name is, and vice versa. I remember that name, but I have no idea what they look like. Do you feel like being in tune with yourself and meditating, does it help with your ability to recollect things?
Yeah, so there's a lot of studies that show that mindfulness is really helpful for aging. So for exactly that, like memory decline, it can help with kind of prevent dementia is like one of the things that you can do.
Because it's like exercising the brain.
Yeah, totally. So I have both my parents meditating now. It's like, no, like, guess you're getting a little bit older. I think that you need to do this like on a regular basis. I just want to make sure you don't forget things. I mean, as far as like on a regular basis, have I noticed anything? I would say, yeah, my memory is probably a bit better. I don't know that it's like significantly. I mean, it doesn't really the goal. It can be a great, side effect of meditating and mindfulness. But as far as like, it can help. There's research that shows that it does help memory. I'm not a neuroscientist. I can't really speak to the brain mechanisms of how that all works, but it is really fascinating that can be one of the things that happens for people.
I've heard that being stressed out will cause you to forget things. Like your brain is, I guess you're just getting overwhelmed, and your brain is like, hey, we need to focus on this one thing and then just forget everything else. It's kind of like like when you get into a fight or flight mode. Like,
Yeah.
it's really hard to, if you scare somebody or if you stress somebody out, just like taking a test. You take a test and you get stressed out, your mind just kind of blinks and you just forget stuff. So, I mean, do you feel like, there's some correlation with that, with like reducing stress and then being able to just, calm your brain and be able to remember, just have a more balanced brain.
Yeah, totally. I think that what we've seen is that stress, like you mentioned, can definitely cause memory problems, anxiety, depression, a lot of chronic illnesses, side effect is brain fog. So inability to remember things or even like what you just did. And when you are using something like mindfulness to help with some of these other problems, you typically do notice that, yeah, like those problems become less and less. So brain fog, for example, is something I researched over the summer, and like how to prevent it, or how to help with it. And one of the suggested things is to do mindfulness and meditation, because it will help you, again, become more present. If you're more present, you should be less stressed, and you should be able to remember kind of what's going on.
So going back to like a body connection, you have these things where you're learning about your pain and everything. Was there anything that you could correlate with nutrition wise? Was there any types of like foods that helped with this, or is there no correlation there?
It's the food thing's interesting. I really suck at at changing my diet. To be totally honest, it's really hard. I have noticed that dairy is the worst thing for me.
Hmm.
So I went mostly dairy free, but I was still sneaking a little bit in here and there. But the other day, I actually decided that wasn't even worth sneaking in stuff anymore. Like, I think I just need to be 100% dairy free. Gluten is the other one. I do notice that I'm a bit worse if I have more gluten. Struggle a little more with that to remove it completely. So I'm kind of 50-50. Like, I'm a lot less than I was, but not totally gluten free. I know that there's a lot of research like certain foods will affect certain people different ways. And I think that's really like working with like a naturopath or nutritionist, or even just using like the autoimmune protocol diets to figure out what your trigger foods are, really, really helpful and important. And if you can stick to it, like, all the power to you. I might try again in the future, but I have just not been successful so far.
Do you think that people who tend to eat unhealthy have worse are in worse situations than people who are eating healthier, or is there, just seems like everybody's about the same?
Ooh, it's a hard question for me to answer. I mean, I'm not a doctor. I don't have any specialties in that area. I would say, I mean, there's definitely research that shows a correlation between what we eat and how we feel physically and mentally. So I think, if we want to go back to grade school and just talk about like eating your food groups and, eating balanced meals, trying not to eat too much takeout, try to eat more, home cooked stuff, because at least you know what's in it. Probably really important for most of us to do.
Yeah, I mean, I've heard a lot about what are they called? Like I guess it's just super fruits, or something like that. It's like berries, and it's like blueberries and certain other things. They really help with like your brain activity. It's I've heard a lot about I think like walnuts. Walnuts help with your brain activity and helping reduce dementia and stuff like that. So I've always thought that that's really interesting because I think that that's something so simple,
Yeah.
is just eat this, and it's not like walnuts taste like kale. That I just had to throw that in there because kale is something that I used to try to eat all the time, and I gave up on it. Or arugula. Oh God, I hate arugula. It's the worst thing ever. But and then also people have said foods that look like body parts are meant to. I don't know if it's like they're meant to help that body part, or it's just good for you. Period. Like they say, like a walnut kind of looks like a brain, so
Right.
it's good for your brain. And then like kidney beans, they are good for that. So I don't know. I think that's very interesting thing for us humans. As we evolve through life, we should definitely eat healthy, but um, just understanding like what we put in our bodies can affect us long term for whatever's going on. I know people who I know a guy. He said that when he eats sugar, his hips start hurting. I was
Oh,
like, oh
interesting.
wow, that's pretty crazy, and good on you for noticing that,
Mhm.
because that's something that most people might they just eat ice cream and they're like, oh man, my hips. It's like, yeah, you got a problem. You're not just hurting, man. You have an actual issue. You should get that checked out. So it's something we should all be aware of.
Yeah, totally. I think, and that's just right, the awareness part, right? Like, just, if you're noticing what's affecting you, then you can at least make the choice to eat it or not. Like,
Yeah.
no one says you have to stop eating it, but like, at least you know what's going to happen. Like, if I decide to have some cheese, like, I know I probably won't feel really good, but, I still have the autonomy to make that decision or not.
Yeah, absolutely. Is there a is there like a I guess a metric to determine like how either how bad your like maybe an autoimmune disease or your illness is, or is it just like a 0 or 100 type of scale?
Um, so for chronic pain specifically, most doctors will just use like a 1 to 10 scale. So 10 is like your excruciating pain, and one is your fine. So that's probably the most common. As far as like other autoimmune symptoms, I'm not sure of any scale like that's specifically used. It just seems to be like, report your symptoms. And I mean, obviously, if you're having like organ problems, that would indicate more severe disease, versus some inflammation or pain.
Mm.
So I think it's really kind of subjective in that as well. I think especially for doctors, what it seems is that you go to one doctor and say one thing, and they might be like, "Oh, it's not a big deal," and another doctor might be like, "It is." So,
I actually know a guy that I worked with, and he was telling me that his knee was swollen up, and he said that he thought it was just like he went to the doctor, and the doctor told him that, oh, it looks like you hit it on something, and or you were working out and something happened, so it's just inflammation. You're swollen up. So he was like, all right. So he said one day he was cutting his grass, and he said he could barely breathe, and so he ended up going to the hospital, went to the emergency room, and they found out that he had an aneurysm, and had a blood clot that was close to his lungs, and they said it moved from his knee up there, and I'm like, oh my god, dude. And they're like, yeah, they said that I was real close from like dying if I didn't get that taken care of. And I was like, man, and that's something that who would have thunk it? You go to the doctor, and they tell you it's nothing. You just swelling up. But he did tell me that, that he drinks a lot of cranberry juice, and they told him he can't anymore because he can't have vitamin K. so he can't have like leafy greens and stuff like that. And I was like, man, that's wild. But yeah, I mean, simple stuff like that.
Yeah, I think it's, I mean, very scary. It's good that your friend's okay, but like also it's kind of where we have to be our own health advocates. So if we go to the doctor and the doctor says it's nothing, but I mean, like sometimes we're just convinced that's correct, and often it is nothing, right? I would say for like 90% of people, you go to the doctor with some small problem, it is literally whatever small problem they said it is. But if you are, kind of experiencing ongoing stuff, I think that's where you really have to be like, no, like I need a referral to a specialist or I need more testing, because sometimes, especially primary care, they just, they're generalists. They don't have a specialty, so they're just going to go with very basic knowledge maybe on that presentation and what's most common, as opposed to, this could actually be a problem for you.
Do you think that there is, let's just say, a sufficient amount of knowledge and information out there for what you've been looking into your field of study with your masters, or do you feel like we're at the bottom of the barrel, and people need more funding and more help to get this kind of information out there?
Yeah, I think that there is a lot of information out there if you know where to look. So when I do research, I mean, like I go read scholarly articles. Like it's like the stuff that nobody wants to actually read,
Bedtime
because
stories.
it's pretty dry. But there is a lot of research out there for, when we're talking mental health and chronic illness, we're talking mindfulness and chronic illness. When you're talking even just about specific chronic illnesses, you can definitely go find the information. The problem was that, well, there's a couple problems. So one, there could always be more funding, and there's always more funding for certain things than for other things, right? So, there's more funding for, some types of cancer than there are other types of cancer. We know that. There's more funding for, certain mindfulness studies versus other mindfulness studies. So yes, I think funding could definitely be more. But I think the real big problem is getting the information to everybody else, like all the lay people. Like, so yeah, great if all the, master's students, PhD students, and researchers are reading this, but who's telling who's telling the chronic pain patients what the research says, right? Um, Hopefully they're doctors or therapists or whoever is, but that's not, I mean, it really depends on how much those people are staying up on the research too. So it's, like what you're doing here with the podcast is great, because then maybe some people can learn something about this that they may not have access to before.
Yeah, and to me, I'm a huge advocate for communicators. Like I said, it would be amazing if large companies who create products, or any company who creates a product, pay a famous YouTuber to make a manual or a how-to for your product. Because if anybody can just watch a YouTube video to understand how to use your product. And 9 times out of 10, if you buy something and you want to know how to use it, the first thing you do is go to YouTube to figure out how to use it. So you might as well have people who are dedicated to making a great video to how to do something. So I think that people who can communicate well, and as you said, it's all about the people who's telling this information. Like there's a very small percentage of people who are like you and going to read those dry articles. So if you can have something that's somewhat entertaining, or just easy to understand, it doesn't have to be entertaining, but easy to understand, then people are going to be more inclined to research that information and to go get that information, because it's kind of discouraging if you know for a fact that, like, I'm not even going to be able to read that, so I'm not even going to bother. So yeah, like whoever's communicating the information, just more power to you if you can make it easily understandable for people.
Yeah, totally. Even so, I read a lot of like, self-help books too. And I was reading, so I read one book and then I started another. So I read When the Body Says No by Gabor Mate. And Dr. Gabor Mate, if anybody's not familiar, he's this Canadian doctor who he worked in palliative care. He's worked with addictions, and he has written a lot about how the mind-body connection, essentially. So he's the one who has talked a lot about repression and chronic illness and trauma and chronic illness and all of that. So read his book, and it was great because it was like, yeah, here's some science and some studies, and here is like a patient of his and all about their story. And, like he interviewed his patients for the book. It's fantastic. Really easy read, really entertaining, great way to get the information across. I'm reading another book now, and this author, he just puts like a lot of science in, but nothing, and then like kind of like a metaphor or something that's animal based, but like no human story. So it's really dry, and I'm like, oh, like I can only read so much of this science in one day, versus the other book I was like, oh, I want to keep reading. So yeah, I think definitely the way communications like put out into the world is very important.
Yeah, people love stories. People love to hear other people's stories. So like the things that you talk about, your experience with everything you've had with your chronic illness, and being able to relay that information, and how you ended up going to school and learning more, and dealing with your whole process of everything you went through, and in the meditation, like that's the type of thing that somebody's going to be able to connect to, and they're going to be able to relate to that. And like you said, the word you used earlier, like empathize. Like some people don't even really understand the difference between sympathy and empathy. Like if you really have somebody who has been through what you've been through, and they can empathize with you, then it's like your brain just unlocks a new depth of feeling, a new depth of life, because you are able to have some sort of connection with somebody, and then you are able to just understand like what's really going on. Because if you don't, then it's kind of like a wall, or something that's just holding you back from being able to to just understand what the situation, what's going on. So I think it's awesome, everything that you're doing. And you have a podcast, right?
I do, yeah. So it's a podcast for the chronic illness community, and it does kind of combine this, mind-body connection throughout it. It's called Chronically Living and How to Make the Most of It. So yeah, we talk about like I bring on different experts from different fields to talk about, maybe try this, this week, the episode was on hypnotherapy. So, maybe try hypnotherapy for your chronic pain, or, try a diet change. And then I usually come in with episodes on like how to help your mental health while you're having a chronic illness.
So on that note, do you practice trying different types of therapies, or are you like, hey, this is my one type, and I like this, and this is what I do?
Yeah, sorry, with clients or myself?
Yourself?
Yes, with myself.
Well, both. Well, both.
Yeah. So for myself, I definitely will try different things. I'm very open when I go to, physical therapy. And one time she's like, do you want to try cupping? Like, I'll try cupping on you and see if it helps. And I was like, sure. Like, it's not going to harm me. So I'll try it out. Or, trying different things like, whether it's medical cannabis, or if it's, a supplement, or yeah, absolutely. I will try anything and see how it works. I think one thing everybody needs to know is like change is slow. So you can't just try something one time and then decide whether it works or not. Usually you need about 10 weeks to really know if something's going to help you. So, and I have to remind myself that too, because I also have that inclination, just want that instant cure. It's like, oh, but I removed gluten from my diet for a week, and then I don't feel any different. I'm just hangry now. Like, well, like wasn't long enough. And then with clients, so again, I practice this acceptance and commitment therapy, and as well as like some cognitive behavioral stuff, but acceptance commitment therapy, just because it has such a strong evidence base for this client population. And there's a lot of mindfulness in it. So it's a very mindfulness-based type of therapy.
Something that you said really makes sense to me is like people wanting that instant gratification of, making a change. So as we talk about, like, your diet, number one, like that's probably the number one. Diet and exercise are probably the number one and number two, or 1A, 1B things that people want instant gratification from. And it's just a process. Like, it just takes a while to to be in the shape you want to be, or to see changes in your body. Not even like looking good, but just like acne. Like, some people will eat bad, and then they develop a lot of acne, and if they decide they're going to go vegetarian, they think that's going to clean up their skin in 1 week. It just might not happen. Like, it might be months, it might be a year. We don't know. Like, it's all about your body finding out what's good for you, and then taking that on. Like, do you know how long it took you to realize about your dairy issue?
Um, I kind of had some inclinations like a long time ago, but then I guess when I really started to remove the majority of dairy from my diet, I noticed probably within like a month or so that it made a difference. So I mean, like that's relatively quickly, right? So if we're talking 10 weeks is the norm, then 4 or 5 is fast. I think the biggest thing for me was like actually exercise to notice that make a difference. But again, it was like, going to the gym a couple of times a week and slowly making a difference. And it was probably, yeah, closer to that 10-week mark before I was like, no, like this is really good for me. I need to keep doing this because it's helping me a lot.
So, on the topic of exercise, how did that affect you with your pain? Like, was it something where you were like, oh, I did, I ran, or I was on the treadmill for 5 minutes and my legs are severely hurting, so that's my threshold? Or were you like, well, let's try and do 10 minutes and see how far I can push my body? Did you just try to gradually climb it up, or how'd you do it?
Yeah, definitely a gradual step way to do it, I think, is probably the best for a lot of people with chronic pain. I was actually terrified to go work out because I was like, well, if I'm in pain and I'm not doing anything, then I'm probably going to be in more pain if I'm trying to, lift weights or, go for a run on the treadmill.
Yeah.
But actually, the research shows that exercise is one of the most evidence-based treatments for chronic pain. So if you have chronic pain, you actually should be exercising. Now, like what you should be doing for exercise is really going to vary, I think, by the person. And again, like I'm not an exercise expert, but from what I've researched and what I've seen for myself is, yeah, I use a kind of a more gradual program. I also went and worked out with a personal trainer for 4 sessions, and my personal trainer happened to have worked with someone with an autoimmune disease before. So he was fantastic. He really worked on like developing a program for me that I could do, that I could step up to like a more advanced if I wanted to, at which I eventually did. And he also was really good to emphasize, like if you're having a flare, which is basically when your symptoms are way worse, then you probably shouldn't exercise during that period. And I think that was good advice. So, just knowing, again, it's like it's that mindfully watching your body. Like, if you do start exercising and you will start to notice a difference if you're being mindful about it.
Did it take like did it take a little bit getting used to, like, being sore, like the difference between your chronic illness pain and then like a workout pain?
Yeah. And I think, yes, this is where mindfulness is really important actually when you're exercising, because there is a difference and you can notice the difference.
Hmm.
I would say I actually noticed the difference pretty quickly. Like it was, my pain versus like, the soreness from working out almost feels good, right? Like, you did something good with your body.
Yeah.
So it's like, yeah, it's a little sore today, but it's okay. Versus, like a really more intense pain that's, more chronic illness related, chronic pain related. So yeah, I noticed pretty quickly, and I think that was really helpful. But again, I had already been practicing mindfulness for a while, so I think that probably helped. But I definitely think most people would notice the difference if they, again, stuck to it and understood that like this change might take a while to happen.
Did you struggle with like anxiety, or were you really stressed out? Like, was that something that you had to work on during your meditation, or was that were you just meditating just for the sake of it?
Yeah, I definitely had a lot of anxiety, especially kind of that right after my diagnosis, and I was in a relationship that didn't last, because of all that, because of my diagnosis, but also because of my anxiety about my diagnosis, and so that was actually the main reason I went to see a therapist, was because I just needed to talk to somebody about this anxiety. And yeah, meditation is a great way to help with that. I use that a lot with my clients, is, not just meditations, but, grounding activities, really mindful, like, let's just train the parasympathetic nervous system to kick in type of activities.
Yeah, I feel like just being able to overcome like whatever anxieties you have is just something that's super helpful for you through everything. You know, as I was talking about, like taking a test or just doing things at the gym. Like a lot of people get self conscious. You know, when they go
Mhm.
to a gym, they see other people looking great, and then they feel like they don't look great, and then it just kind of their performance, just dwindles from there. So if you're dealing with that kind of thing, I could definitely see how it could affect everything that you do from on a day to day basis. So being able to do that kind of meditation whenever throughout the day would help you. As I say, going to the gym or whatever your practice is or your career is.
Yeah. And definitely meditation. And the other thing that is really helpful is like acceptance, because especially with emotions, we like, emotions are important. Like, a little bit of anxiety is okay. We're actually supposed to have a little bit of anxiety. Like, this is a very ancient part of our brain working at that point to keep us alive. And yes, we have anxiety about things now that have nothing to do with keeping us alive. It's just our brain didn't quite understand that technology came along, and it's, life has changed a bit. But um, again, like, just being able to accept that, yeah, like sometimes I'm going to feel a bit anxious, or sometimes I'm going to feel sad. Like, grief's okay, sadness is okay. Obviously, we don't want to, have depression, but if we do, it's okay to have a little bit of sadness even then, like, because that's a normal human emotion, just like happiness is. We just tend to think about them very differently. So I found, and also for chronic pain, like this bit of acceptance of, like, can I just notice it and maybe make some room for it, and, allow it to be there while I do the other things that I need to or want to do in my life. It's really, really helpful.
Something I just thought about that I was going to bring up earlier was I read a book. I did an audio book for like, oh gosh, I can't even think of the author's name. But anyways, the book was about emotional intelligence, and one thing that it was talking about is that really stuck with me that I think I struggle with completely, and I believe most people struggle with this is the ability when somebody is talking to just listen. And I was like, "Oh man, this is me." So going throughout the book is basically trying to help you understand like what emotional intelligence is, and then help you figure out if you have high emotional intelligence. And it was pretty cool because like I always thought that I was really good at understanding people, but I didn't know that that meant I had a high emotional intelligence. So finding that out was really cool. But uh, back to the just listening to people. He was talking about if you have a spouse, if you get into an argument or something, and then one of you starts talking, just listen. Like, don't think about what you're going to reply to what they're going to say. Just listen and just like basically shut your brain off and try not to, well, don't shut it off, but like, try not to think about how you're going to combat, whatever they're saying. Just plain old listen and then develop your conversation when they're done. Don't try to think about, oh man, they just said this, I'm about to come back with it. So it's something that I think is really neat about the ability to just control what's going on in your head, and try not to get too caught up in in how you're feeling, but to just relax, listen, and then take it from there.
Yeah, totally. I think, and again, that's just mindfulness. Again, you're listening, you're very present to what's happening. It gives you a chance to notice what you're feeling, right? So if you notice you're having that reaction where you want to respond, but you're not responding because you're still being present with what's happening. Like that can improve communication in so many circumstances. So totally important. And it's funny is like as a therapist, obviously I have to be really present with whatever the client's saying, but at the same time I also do have to kind of think of what I'm going to say next. So it's like this weird balance. Like therapists have a weird balance where it's like I'm very present with everything you're saying, but I do have to eventually respond to what you're saying.
I even do that during this podcast. Like every podcast that I do, I that's what I'm struggling with, because I don't take notes. I don't have any notes. Like nothing's prepared. I'm just talking to you. So that's something that I'm like, as I'm talking right now, I'm trying to think of the next thing I have to say, or like what you might say, and then while you're talking, I'm trying to pay attention as much as possible, but I'm also like trying to think of my next question. And so it's something that, it's difficult, and I think by doing the podcast, like having all these conversations, like as you can see, my studio, I do in-person podcast as well, and I think I'm on episode. My next one would be 52, so I've done 51, and shoot, I think I'm on. You might be the 25th or so virtual podcast. So I've definitely noticed that as I've done more, I've gotten better at, number one, listening, and then number two, just digesting that information, and then being able to, I guess, just bring up something else, and just being in tune with how people talk. I think podcasts. There's a billion podcasts out there, but I think it's good. Like it's good for society, for people to just be willing to have these in-depth conversations, because we're so used to text, SMS, short message system, where we're just just saying K and stuff like that. Like it's good for people to have in-depth conversations, because it brings out our thoughts, it brings out our feelings, it brings out emotions, and like some of my favorite moments I have with people are when we've got nothing to do, and we're forced to talk, because it's something that you end up talking about, things that you usually don't talk about, and you're able to, I guess, just learn more about each other, and learn more about what it is to be a human.
Totally. One of my favorite things I haven't done very long time now, but was to go to the lake. And at the lake I used to go to, there was no electricity and no cell service. So it's like candles and, well, we were gonna play board games, read a book, or talk, like,
Yeah,
or go for a swim. But like and you are way more present, and you do have way better conversations with people, and you learn more, which is great.
absolutely. And when you do these things, it's like those exercises. It's opening up your brain to learn how to, number one, communicate, number two, how to think, and then number three, being able to develop that attachment to other people, and have that higher emotional intelligence, so that you just become a better person. Like you are able to be aware of what you're doing on a day-to-day basis. And I think some of the best um, leaders or bosses are people with high emotional intelligence. And it was talking about that in the book I read, because it was saying, a lot of times your boss might not have a high emotional intelligence, and they're just telling people what to do, and not really understanding that person's emotions. Like there might be a guy named Frank who is always grumpy in the morning, and for some reason that boss keeps making Frank talk to everybody in the morning. It's like, hey, Frank is the worst person to talk to in the morning. Stop making Frank talk to people in the morning. So if you've got a type of person who is just aware, like aware of themselves, aware of everybody else, and they're just mindful of what's going on, then they can create a better work environment and they can create a better community amongst people.
Yeah, totally. And you see that all the time with, I worked in retail a long time because, I mean, trying to support yourself in film is very difficult. So retail was my other half. And, and I can like totally tell you which general managers of stores were, great with employees, and the stores perform better when you have this boss who actually cares about the staff versus, the other end. I've had terrible bosses because they don't care about, how I feel, how the other staff feels, and then the store doesn't perform as well. Makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, if there's the opportunity to just gather information like data and just be able to understand how people are working, then you should take it. Like surveys, a lot of people don't fill out surveys, truthfully, but but if people did, then you would be able to understand your people that way. But I think the best way to do it is just by talking to people. Like just have a conversation with people, and then just understand how they feel, what they do, and it just creates a better atmosphere for people in their feelings. Like just like we were talking about, like whatever you do on a day-to-day basis might be affecting you, and like some people might not even realize that their job is making them stressed out. Like they might just think, oh, I am just stressed out. Well, it might be that somebody who works with you is stressing you out, and you might not even comprehend it because you just do it every single day. So that might be where your stress is coming from, or it might be, two people tend to argue, and you have to be around them. They might not be affecting you immediately, but it's just because they're in the area and they argue, and it just builds up stress in your head. So those are the type of things that I think are very valuable in a workplace. But it's good for your self health.
Yeah, totally. And I think that's just really good all around, right? To have that connection. We talked about this a bit earlier, if people have chronic illness, if you don't have connections in your real life, maybe find the connections elsewhere, like online. People do that all the time, especially during the pandemic. Oh my gosh, like we all spent like a year just being online with people, right? But you can still totally, and just like you and I, we can still totally connect while being online. And sometimes that's a great alternative option that we need to remember to do. And you do it the same way. If you're asking questions, you're being present, and just having that conversation. It's, as human beings, we're meant to be social creatures, and yeah, there's going to be some exceptions. So like, there's going to be the hermit who lives in the woods and that's what he likes, and that's totally fine. But most of us do need to talk to other people at least some of the time, right? So it is really important for our overall health. And then, something you said kind of with that was like about stress. And I think what I really see as being important is like this biopsychosocial um, outlook, which is pretty common in healthcare and mental health care right now, but about everything from stress to mental health disorders to addictions to physical health conditions, and really looking, okay, what are the biological components? So stress, it's neurotransmitters firing in your brain, right? And people who are stressed tend to have more of certain neurotransmitters. And then we look at the psychological, well, how are we reacting to maybe the person who is stressing us out at work, right? Like what is our reaction to that? And social is maybe that person, right? So like, or maybe our whole work environment. So really like understanding like all the different components of what's probably going on for you can actually help us then make systematic changes if we need to.
Kelsey, I want to go ahead and wrap this up. It's been phenomenal talking to you and just learning about all the things that are dealing with chronic illness and people being able to just control like what's going on in their day-to-day life by being mindful of what's going on with their body and their mind and their gut. These are the type of things that I really hope people gather from this podcast, because I think there's something that can help out anybody. It doesn't matter who you are. or what you're into. You should definitely be self-aware and open to learning more about yourself. So we talked about your podcast. We talked about the things that you've learned and researched. Is there anything um, that we missed? Are you doing something that you need to tell the people about?
No, like the podcast is definitely the place to go. I also have a blog. It's chronically living.com. So if you prefer to read, but if you're listening to this podcast, I'm assuming you want to listen, but it's kind of complimentary. So there's some similar things, some different. But yeah, those are kind of the best places to I guess hear what I have to say. But I think we covered a lot of great stuff, and I am just starting new contract work with two integrated health clinics in the Vancouver area. So that's what I'm doing. But yeah, this has been super fun. So thank you so much for having me on.
Awesome, no problem. Uh, Tell everybody how they can reach you, or if they need to reach you for anything, and how they can find your podcast or whatever. Everything you got.
Yeah, so podcast is available everywhere you get them. So again, it's chronically living and how to make the most of it. The blog, it's chronically-living.com. If you have a question, definitely the best place to get me would probably be Instagram. So it's chronically.living_. Apparently all the other chronically livings were taken. So, but yeah, you guys can DM me on that if you have a question. And then I just want to say, like, if you are struggling and, you need some mental health support, definitely reach out to a therapist in your area. There's great online directories, and a lot of telehealth is available as well nowadays. So.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for doing this, and I really hope that everything we said today helps somebody, and I really hope that your work is reaching out to the masses. Alrighty. Well, thanks for everybody for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.